If you want to be accepted, why don't you just try to act normal? It's a sentiment served up to main marginalised folk, the apparent end-all to racism, ableism and queerphobia. It's the declaration that to be accepted by society, we, the marginalised, must become the very thing that sought to harm us, that we must adopt its customs of violence and oppression to become the model citizen, to be assimilated. Now before we continue with the topic of today's video, I'd just like to give a content warning for the following subjects: ableism, sexism, racism, fascism, queerphobia, slavery, and police violence. Whilst I don't remember the first time I came into contact with such ideas as a queer youth, I do remember the first time I heard it from a family member. It was New Year's Day 2010, the day after my father let me know that he got his friend to help him track me down on YouTube, a place I was open about my bisexuality. As we left the house to go to the shops, he parked the car at the top of the drive and turned to me. There he lectured me on how I should keep my bisexuality hidden, particularly from any girls I was interested in. When I asked him why, he responded by telling me that no girl would ever trust me to be faithful, that they'd always be left with the fear that I preferred men and would commit adultery to feed that hunger. To drive home his point, my father told me that my stepmom would divorce him if she ever discovered he had cheated on her with a man. So I asked him, what would she do if she discovered he cheated on her with a woman? He replied, "That's different," in a tone that declared the conversation at an end as he pulled out of the driveway. To clarify, I was 15 at the time. But do you know what one of the worst parts about the whole thing was? The friend he'd roped in to help him track me down, it was his best friend from his late teens. And he's a gay man. I didn't know it at the time, but what my dad was doing was forwarding assimilation culture or assimilationism. He was trying to encourage me to straight pass in society, to adhere to what a heteronormative culture deemed acceptable, something that being attracted to more than one gender was not. He didn't want me to display my queerness and be proud of it. He certainly didn't want me to flounce it. No, I was to be one of those respectable LGBT+ folk. And all it would cost me is part of my face. Assimilation culture refers to a society or environment that attempts to coerce marginalized groups into presenting, behaving, thinking, feeling, and or identifying in accordance with roles or standards the dominant culture has prescribed for them. Very often this is presented as a benevolent act. A person tells us that we should just try to be normal and that doing so will magically end the abuse. However, this isn't the case. All it really is a threat, even if not made intentionally. It's society telling us that unless we get in the cage they've made for us, they will continue to withhold our rights and target us with abuse. Any non-compliance will be used as justification for doing so, never stopping to question whether it actually justifies the harm inflicted upon us. Now this notion is nothing new. Indeed, the melting pot, a phrase that came about in the early 20th century, though the metaphor itself dates back much further, refers to the same concept, specifically in relation to ethnicity, something that is sometimes referred to as ethnocide. That is, the deliberate and systematic destruction of the culture of an ethnic group. Perhaps the most on-the-nose phrase in this regard is the mortar of assimilation, as depicted in this 1889 cartoon, showing the caricature of a chimpanzee-looking Irishman wielding a knife, charging Lady America as she mixes other cultures with a spoon labelled "Equal Rights." The cartoon is captioned, "The mortar of assimilation and the one element that won't mix." The underlying message here being that people must allow themselves to be broken down and mixed into a homogeneous lump of slag, stripped of their heritage and identity, their cultural uniqueness, assimilated, which is not a passive act, by the way. It is in fact a violent one. When Donald Trump declared to the world that he was ready to target 52 Iranian heritage sites over ongoing disputes, The world was rightly mortified, and officials quickly reminded Trump that such acts would be in violation of both the International Criminal Court as well as the 2347th resolution of the United Nations Security Council. No such care is given to living heritage and identity. Sadly, we live in a world that cares more about objects than real thinking and feeling people. And yet, if we resist said violence, well, then we're not deserving of our rights and protections. And this is where assimilation culture intersects with another similar concept, respectability politics. The notion that it's okay for those in power to withhold a demographic's rights and enact further violence towards us, so long as they disapprove of our tone. It's this belief that unless disabled people, queer folk, the working class, women, or people of colour get on their knees and beg those in power for our rights, whatever they do to us is justified. In its purest form, it's rights at ransom. Now, one key difference between assimilation culture and respectability politics is the fact that respectability politics focuses specifically on political action, whilst assimilation culture has a more broad and all-encompassing set of demands. Assimilation culture is not strictly about how we try to gain our rights, it's about how we live every day. But it's important to understand that they're cut from the same cloth, with both being the promise that if you follow the steps they laid out for you, that if you sit there and ask nicely, well then, you'll be given your rights. Except that has never been the case throughout history. All major advancements in the rights of people of colour, the working class, women, disabled folk and queer folk have been fought and bled for. A fact most inconvenient for assimilationist culture, so it in turn tries to rewrite history. This is what gave us the Uncle Tom version of Martin Luther King Jr., his corpse rolled out and made to dance to a racist tune, discouraging black protest. Because assimilation culture doesn't want you to remember Martin Luther King Jr. as he lived. They don't want you to remember him as the man who worked alongside vocal critic of non-violence, Malcolm X, a black bisexual Muslim, by the way. They don't want you to remember him as a man who stated, very clearly, that, quote, "A riot is the language of the unheard," end quote. They certainly don't want you to remember that in spite of his personal methods, he was murdered by white America, resulting in riots in over 100 cities. This is what gave us the sanitized and commercialized rendition of Pride. This idea that it's just a parade, a celebration, and that our struggle is over. Something which is nowhere near true on any level. Very recently, the British government was revealed to be intent on ignoring the facts that 70%, a clear majority of the nation, openly support self-ID for trans people. Meanwhile, in the United States, Donald Trump declared it okay for medical practitioners to deny LGBT+ folk medical care. And in spite of Stonewall being a riot instigated by the most marginal groups within the queer community, so trans folk, people of colour, and working class queers, white upper class cis gay men swept in and called for such groups to be removed from the then gay liberation movement. The reason? Well, the queers, especially trans folk, were just too deviant for allo cishet society to ever accept. This is something that stuck with the movement, hindering it every step of the way. Whilst assimilationists begged for their rights like beaten dogs, ignoring the deaths of their less privileged peers, queer folk fought for all of us. And they fought not just for our right to exist, but to do so openly. Fact is, we have the perfect scenario in which to test the claims made by proponents of assimilation culture. And his name was Barack Obama. Half-white, Harvard-educated, speaking with such orating force that he captured the hearts of millions from around the globe, Obama was everything assimilation culture argues a black person should be, and it allowed him to climb the ladder of respectability all the way to the very top. Did that stop racism in America? Reminder that Black Lives Matter was started under Obama's presidency. Now, Maybe you think I'm expecting too much too quickly. Maybe it's just not reasonable to expect assimilation culture as forwarded to end racism in the United States with a single black president. Okay, well, how was Obama treated? Was he spared any racism personally on account of how well appropriated he was? No. If anything, it increased the level of racist hostility, leading to his critics to try and delegitimize his assimilation on any grounds. Enter birtherism, Islamophobia, and the Michelle Obama is a trans woman conspiracies. Okay, well, did things change in the Democratic Party? Surely it's reasonable to expect some sort of advancement in the very party Obama belonged to. Well, whilst the black community speaks of defunding and abolishing police, Obama's former vice president and current frontrunner, Joe Biden, is boasting plans to donate a further $300 million to police forces, claiming he wants to teach police how to hobble unarmed black people like slaves rather than kill them outright. And I say outright on account of the fact that he still refuses to support universal health care, meaning that being shot in the leg is still a death sentence for many impoverished black Americans. It would just take months or even years of agonizing pain to kill its victim. In spite of the fact that black officials were elected to power, the status quo remained virtually unchallenged when it came to racism in America. Several weeks of justifiably violent uprisings over police murders of black citizens has achieved more than assimilation culture did in the 8 years of Obama's presidency. They forced various city councils to the table to discuss actively defunding police and rerouting that money elsewhere, to things such as housing services, mental health services, and other social security programs. We also can't overstate the impact this whole thing has had on the social environment. The way in which racist statues and mascots have been torn down and removed emphasizes a cultural shift. The statement that this sort of thing will no longer be tolerated. This removal of the United States racist wallpaper, whilst not an end, is a big step in the right direction. The reality is this. Desperate attempts to end the slaughter of black Americans has done more to tackle racism in the United States than assimilation culture acting under perfect conditions for 8 years. Is it any wonder that so many black Americans are disillusioned with the electoral system? Even when they win, they die. That's why it's so fucking insulting for mostly white people to keep telling black people to vote instead of rioting, completely ignoring the fact that the voting system is rigged against them. They tried it that way, and they were lied to, just like every other marginalized group. Now, I should be clear that when people are arguing for assimilation culture and respectability politics, they're not necessarily part of some conscious effort to hurt marginalized people. Some are, some know exactly what they're doing, but that's not true of everyone. A lot of what they do comes down to sheer willful ignorance, which, by the way, does not excuse the harm done. The fact is, when an upper-class, able allo-cishet white person tells a marginalized person to file a complaint to reform the system, they're used to that system listening to what they say. So it makes sense from their standpoint. Which is why people need to equip themselves with the knowledge necessary to be an ally. That's the reason we're told to listen when a marginalized person opens up about how systemic bigotry, assimilation, and respectability politics harms their community. Because this is our lived reality, and we need to be heard, loud and proud. However, people will be quick to point out that it's not just outsiders who push assimilation culture, that there are indeed marginalized folk who forward salvation via assimilation, and they do so to varying degrees. Some are more passive in their approach, talking about the need to prove our worth, whilst others are rather hostile gatekeepers. Think true scum in the trans community who attempt to police who is and who isn't a trans person, typically along assimilationist fault lines. Now, there's a variety of explanations as to why this tokenism occurs, and as with outsiders, some are just people genuinely misinformed, whilst others are not. The simplest explanation is that they're just misinformed about their demographics history. Again, the dominant culture loves to revise history, and since they're the dominant culture, they control a large part of the narrative. It's not difficult to create a false consciousness via cultural hegemony, which is the domination of a culturally diverse society by the ruling class who manipulate the culture of that society. For those of you in progressive circles, think back to all the times you've wondered, how is this not taught in schools? When you first heard about things such as the destruction of Greenwood, Tulsa, which was known as Black Wall Street, or the specifics surrounding the Nazi book burnings and how many of those books came from the Institute for Sexual Wissenschaft, a German medical institute that pioneered queer science and healthcare. There's a reason a lot of marginalized activists seem to become more radicalized over time, and a big part of that is their ever-growing understanding of their history. Another reason a person might be a token is immediate survival. Even if a person can see the problems with assimilation culture, very often the abuse brought about by challenging said system is much worse than simply keeping your head low and trying to live your life. We are not soldiers, we didn't pick this fight. We were born into it. Some people are genuinely worried that by supporting counter-assimilation culture, they'll be made to suffer personally. And sometimes saying nothing is not enough. Their silence can be taken as evidence that they don't support the status quo, and therefore deserve the same abuse as the rest of the traitors. This is especially visible in America, where every act of bigotry is dressed up as part of the American dream. Therefore, to be anti-bigotry is to be anti-American, and if you're anti-American, well, why don't you get out of the country? It's practically a battle cry for assimilation culture. If you aren't willing to endure violence against you without complaint, you're not welcome here. However, there are also selfish reasons for becoming a token. Being a token, especially in an age of social upheaval, can be very profitable. There are a lot of well-funded far-right organizations out there willing to pump thousands, even millions behind what could be classed as token ambassadors, fulfilling the same role as social media brand ambassadors, but for a bigoted agenda. For their support, they're often paid, even if indirectly, as well as given a position of conditional immunity and extreme privilege, which can be a very enticing prospect when all you've known for most of your life is absolute shit. And if you're not convinced that this actually happens, just consider Candace Owens or Norm McCorvey. Yet would-be token ambassadors, be warned. The moment you step out of line, you'll suddenly find yourself under attack from the very people you had previously covered for. Not to mention very alone, as nobody from the community you belong to will forgive you for the damage you have done. Now, to be clear on something, just because a marginalized person presents in a way that falls inside the assimilationist margins does not necessitate that they are a token. People are varied, and that's something that extends to marginalized people as well. Some individuals' preferences will just fall within what assimilation culture expects, and that is perfectly acceptable. The issue arises when they try to limit the freedom of other marginalized people, using themselves as an example to argue that it's okay. In the end, I never did take my dad's advice. I was out and proud about my sexuality very early on, though my gender took me a while to catch up. And you know what? I'm glad I didn't hide who I was, because if I had, I would have never seen a side to Aditya that I saw in October of 2014 as she discovered the queer scene. The Atheist, Humanist and Secular Society were only offering free tea and coffee at our university's LGBT+ club night because I, as someone who was also on the LGBT+ Society's board, suggested it. If I hadn't had the courage to be out to do that, well, I wouldn't have started dating her. I wouldn't have moved to India to be with her. And we wouldn't have got married in 2019, just over a year ago. And when we said our vows, I knew I could be safe in the knowledge that when she said, "I do," she meant it about me, bisexuality and all. So that's assimilation culture and respectability politics in theory. Which begs the question of what these things look like in real life. To answer this, I intend to do a series of videos covering assimilation culture as it relates to various marginalized groups, bringing to your attention the sort of thing to keep an eye out for, before finishing up by discussing the facts that assimilation culture is not your friend, how it's more than happy to kill you the moment you step out of line. So if you'd like to hear more about that, then be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Also know that you can support us via Patreon if you appreciate what we do here on the channel. So with that said, we'd just like to thank all our Patreon sponsors, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, Zora and Katie, Garrett Van Vorst, Chelsea Williams, Wellington Marcus, Steve Corbin, Sosh Daniels, Justin Allen, and Atlas5. And from myself and Adita, take care now.